So I recently entered my first duathlon, and these are 10 of the top tips that I picked up from the event for a successful and enjoyable race day. Let's get started. If you're new to multisport, you may not be familiar with what a race belt is. So essentially it's an elastic belt that goes around your waist and holds your race number in place. What makes it really useful, if not essential, in multisport is being able to easily move it around depending on whether you're running or cycling. Your number needs to be on your front and visible during both of the runs, and then on your back whilst you're on the bike. If you don't have a race belt and only have the one number for the entire event, you could find yourself having to take off the number in transition and then pin it to the opposite side of your t-shirt, which is going to waste a massive amount of time. Race belts will vary in design, but mine has 3 bits of string with toggles which you feed through the holes in your number and hold in place. You can then loosen or tighten the belt itself to make it easy to spin around in transition, whilst also keeping it firmly in place whilst you're on the run or the bike. At my first duathlon, the organisers had race belts for sale, so you may be able to pick one up on the day of your event, but I wouldn't risk it and I'll just pick one up online beforehand. They only cost a few quid and are worth having should you really enjoy your first duathlon and want to do more multisport events in the future. Toggle laces are something else that aren't essential but are really helpful to make taking your running shoes on and off much easier and just speed up your time in transition in general. The idea is that you replace the normal laces on your shoes with elastic ones which are held together with a toggle, similar to on the race belts. Ahead of time, you want to make sure that the elastic laces are tight enough so they aren't loose and your foot moves around whilst you're running, but not so tight that they make getting the shoes on and off to be awkward. Like with the race belt, elastic laces are super cheap to buy despite being one of the most valuable changes you can make to speed up your time in transition. They save you having to deal with regular laces which you could trip over during the run if you try and tie them up in too much of a rush. So yeah, for the price and how easy they are to use, I really can't think of any reason as to why you shouldn't be using elastic laces and see some real benefit from them in both T1 and T2. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, it'd be great if you could quickly subscribe if you aren't already, as it really does help out a lot. How much nutrition you think you need is very much an individual thing and will depend on the distance of the race. But even for a sprint duathlon, which I did, I definitely felt that some form of nutrition was needed for a successful race. I'll admit I was unsure as to whether it was worth taking any nutrition at all, as I was expecting the entire race to only take an hour and a bit. But in hindsight, I'm really glad I took something, as I think I would have struggled on the bike and the second run had I not. What you choose to fuel with, again, is very individual. I saw a lot of people at the race with a gel taped to the frame, which they could then easily rip off on the bike. But I tend not to get on too well with gels, especially on the bike, and so chose to put some carb powder and electrolytes in a bottle, which I drank during the bike leg. If doing anything more than a sprint, I would absolutely take on more fuel and make it more of a focus. But as it was a sprint, I felt like I could get away with just the one bottle and some carb powder. Now you will likely see some people take on a gel or something similar during the run, which may well be necessary for the longer distance duathlons, but regardless of the distance, you want to make the most of your time spent on the bike for fueling, as it's generally the easiest time in the race to get nutrition and fluids on board. This will depend quite a lot on how much experience you have with multi-sport events, but even for those of you who may be a bit more experienced but doing a duathlon for the first time, may benefit from replacing the clipless pedals on your bike with flats. You're almost certain to be quicker in transition, not having to change into a different pair of shoes, and it saves you having to pack your cycling shoes. But something to bear in mind is that although you could end up getting in and out of transition sooner than other people, it's unlikely that you'll be able to put out as much power on the bike. So you may want to only consider this if the bike leg of your race is relatively short and probably flat where it's not as important to be clipped into the pedals. I personally kept my clipless pedals on the bike for my sprint and don't regret it, but I can definitely see how sticking to using flat pedals can benefit those with less experience or that are less confident in clipping in and out. Mark Lewis raced a duathlon with flat pedals on his superbike and ended up doing pretty well, so I'll leave a link to his video on that in the description box below. Chances are your event will make the route maps available ahead of time, so my recommendation would be to take a look at them and have a think about which of your shoes would be most appropriate to wear for both of the runs. The majority of time road shoes will be best, but I found my first duathlon took place mainly on grass. Now, although the weather was good on the day, it was still very boggy and quite sketchy in places. I did end up wearing my pair of Saucony Endorphin Speed 2s, as I already had the elastic laces on them, but in hindsight I would have been better off wearing my pair of trail shoes. I'm really, really glad I didn't wear my carbon racing shoes, as running on that grass would have been a recipe for disaster and it would have got absolutely filthy. If you have space, it might be worth packing 2 different pairs of shoes and then making a call on the day to decide which would be the most appropriate for the course and the conditions. Now, you hopefully already know this ahead of your first duathlon, but one of the rules that the organisers are very strict on for safety is having to have your helmet on and fastened before you even touch your bike to unrack it. To avoid temptation in the heat of the moment in transition, or simply forgetting, it's a good idea to hook one of the straps of your helmet over your handlebars. Not only will it be quicker and easier for you to put on and fasten, but you don't have to worry about bending down to pick it up or potentially getting knocked around on the ground within the transition area. I will always put my helmet on before doing anything else in transition, just so I know that it's done and out of the way and I won't risk getting a penalty or in the worst case scenario being disqualified. Looking back, I wish I'd taken this advice on for my first duathlon, and that is to pace yourself during that first run. I know that I went off way too hard trying to keep up with those towards the front, as I found myself blowing within just the first 800 metres or so. Eventually I managed to settle into a more manageable pace, but I did get progressively slower as I ticked off the kilometres in that first 5k run. The second and final run is the time to empty the tank, not at the beginning like I did. Now, I'm not sure how much going off guns blazing at the beginning ultimately affected my performance on the bike and during that second run, but it's definitely something I'll keep in mind for next time, and instead making an effort to keep something in reserve for my time on the bike, where I'm likely to be able to make up more time and that final run at the end. There's nothing worse than being behind schedule and stressing about not arriving to your race in time, so make sure to leave yourself plenty of time to travel and arrive in good time to register and rack your bike. The night before a race, I'll make sure my transition bag is packed and everything to do with the bike is sorted and ready to go, like making sure my power meter and bike computer are fully charged. This just saves having to worry about it in the morning, and most of the time it's an early start which sees you out the door sooner than you probably like. Now, looking back at the other weekend, I probably arrived a bit too early for my race, but I'd much rather this than be panicking about missing the start or forgetting something in transition. Trust me, I've seen it happen at events to others, and it is not a situation you want to be in, especially when it's your first time entering a race. For a duathlon where you don't have to worry about a swim and setting up transition is a bit easier, I would still arrive a good hour to 90 minutes ahead of the start. This may sound a bit extreme, but you'd be surprised at how quickly this time passes. 60 to 90 minutes is plenty of time to get registered, rack your bike, set up your transition area, and do a bit of a warm-up before the start of the race. When you arrive at your race, you are guaranteed to see a massive variety in the kit that people use. Some people will be wearing tri-suits, riding fast, expensive TT bikes, and running in carbon-plated shoes, whilst others may just be wearing cycling shorts and a t-shirt, riding a mountain bike, and running in the only pair of shoes that they have. Kit really doesn't matter unless you're really at the pointy end of the race, and the marginal gains that a particular type of shoe, for example, can provide could make the difference between first and second place. So forget about what everyone else has and just use what you feel confident and comfortable in. It's really important to not try anything new when it comes to the day of your race, and instead stick to what you've tried and tested during your training. A prime example of this would be to not attempt a flying mount unless it's something you've practiced and are competent at. A bit like with the kit, you'll probably see several people with their bike shoes already clipped into their pedals, with the idea that they can quickly jump on their bike and speed up their time in transition. Just because others are doing it doesn't mean you have to, especially as you could waste more time and potentially hurt yourself if you try to do it for the first time and get it very wrong. Now, nutrition is something else that you should keep the same as in training, even more so if your first duathlon is a longer one. You may see some new gels or something at the expo which you fancy giving a try, but unless you have tried them ahead of time, you will have no way of knowing how they affect your stomach when it comes to race day. It's not worth risking your race being affected by being tempted to try something new, so instead stick to what you know works and have practiced during your training. So there you have 10 tips for your first duathlon that I hope will make your first race a successful and enjoyable one. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out this one on screen, where I give you some of my top tips for running a faster 5k park run that helps me to go under sub 19 minutes. Thank you so much for watching this one. Hope you found it useful, and I'll hopefully see you again in the next one.